What if I told you that a seemingly ordinary road trip could change your understanding of the universe forever? On October 12th, 2018, my wife, Emily, and I were driving through the remote stretches of New Mexico, heading from Albuquerque to a small town called Magdalena. The sky that evening was unusually clear, stars scattered like diamonds on black velvet, and the air carried a strange, electric chill. At first, it felt like any other late autumn drive. The hum of the tires on asphalt, the occasional distant howl of a coyote, the soft rhythm of Emily humming along to the radio. But as we crossed the BLM lands near Socorro, something impossible caught our eyes. A sudden flash of light above the horizon, brighter than any aircraft or satellite we had ever seen. It wasn't moving like a plane or blinking like a helicopter. It was still for a moment, hovering, almost observing us. Then, it shot across the sky in a way that defied all laws of physics as we know them, sharp, precise, and utterly silent. My first instinct was disbelief, then panic, then fascination. I slammed on the brakes and pulled over, my heart hammering, while Emily leaned out the window, squinting into the distance. The object disappeared as quickly as it had appeared, leaving a strange, metallic taste in the air, like ozone mixed with something else. We continued driving, both of us unsettled but too curious to stop. That's when the first anomalies began. The GPS began to malfunction, flipping coordinates wildly. Our cell phones lost signal, even though we were not in an area known for dead zones. The car itself seemed to hum with a low vibration that wasn't coming from the engine. Hours later, near a place called Magdalena Ridge Observatory, we saw them. Beings, crouched beside the road, as if waiting. They weren't what movies prepare you for. No green skin, no grotesque features. Instead, they looked fragile, almost delicate, with elongated limbs, large luminescent eyes, and skin that shimmered faintly like liquid silver. The moment we saw each other, a strange recognition passed between us. Emily instinctively reached for my hand. I did the same. I don't know how to explain it, but it felt like we were being communicated with, not through sound, but through awareness, a direct transmission of thought and emotion. Fear, confusion, curiosity. They were not here to harm anyone. They were running. Fugitives from somewhere far beyond our understanding. As we watched, one of them stepped forward, raising a slender arm in what seemed to be a gesture of trust. We wanted to run, to call someone, but we were frozen, overwhelmed by the sheer weight of what we were witnessing. I fumbled for my camera phone, but it wouldn't work, the screen black, unresponsive. Then, one of them touched the ground, and suddenly the air shimmered, like heat above asphalt on a summer day, and the world seemed to tilt for a moment. When it settled, they were gone. Not in a blur, not by moving fast. Just gone. And yet, traces remained. The dust along the roadside was etched with fine, geometric patterns, almost like circuit diagrams. Our watches had stopped, all of them, and a strange timestamp was frozen on Emily's phone. October 12th, 2018, 22:47. We didn't speak for a long time, just sat in the car, hearts racing, minds struggling to process what had happened. That night, we camped under the stars, too shaken to drive further, watching the sky for any sign. And then, around midnight, the most astonishing thing occurred. A silent, saucer-shaped craft appeared, hovering over the ridge, lights pulsating in a rhythm that felt like a heartbeat. Through the glass, we glimpsed movement, figures similar to those we had seen on the roadside, gesturing, almost beckoning us. Emily whispered that she felt they wanted to show us something, a message perhaps, or a warning. We were utterly defenseless, but more than that, fascinated beyond reason. What could they want from us? Why reveal themselves to two random humans on a quiet road in New Mexico? The answer, as we would come to understand over the next several hours, was far more extraordinary than anything I could have imagined. As the craft descended slowly, we noticed the ground beneath it reacting, the dust rising in intricate patterns, shimmering with faint bioluminescence. The air felt charged, alive, and I realized that this was not just a visit. It was an attempt at communication, an invitation into something much bigger than our small, everyday concerns. I reached for Emily's hand again, feeling her grip tighten. Neither of us spoke. Words seemed pointless in the presence of what was clearly a superior intelligence, a civilization not of conquest, but of survival. They were fleeing from something or someone, and in their flight, our lives had intersected with theirs in this vast, lonely desert. The craft remained for what felt like an eternity, though I know it was only minutes, before slowly ascending and vanishing into the cosmos as suddenly as it had appeared. But the sense of presence lingered, a deep, resonant awareness that altered our perception of time and space. We would later learn, through subtle clues, inexplicable patterns, and connections that defied normal explanation, that these beings had chosen us for a reason. Not by chance, but by design. Something about our minds, our experiences, made us capable of understanding, not fully, but enough, to carry a fragment of their story into the human world. That night, as we drove back to the nearest town in silence, our minds raced with questions, and yet a quiet certainty settled in. We had witnessed something profoundly real, something that challenged the very fabric of our understanding, something that would haunt and enlighten us forever. October 12th, 2018 would not be a date we would ever forget. And this was only the beginning. The next morning, October 13th, 2018, we woke in our small rented cabin in Magdalena with the desert sun piercing through thin curtains. Sleep had been shallow, filled with fragments of impossible dreams, visions of vast silver cities suspended in the sky, beings communicating through cascades of light, and a feeling of traveling across the stars without moving an inch. Emily and I exchanged glances over coffee, unspoken questions hanging in the air. We both knew that the encounter had left a permanent mark, something that could not be explained with rational thought or dismissed as a hallucination. We decided to revisit the site where we had seen them the night before, desperate for more answers. As we drove through the dirt roads leading to the ridge, we noticed unusual patterns in the landscape that we hadn't seen before. Subtle depressions in the earth forming circular and triangular arrangements, almost like landing pads, though scaled far too small for any human craft. Our GPS still acted erratically, spinning wildly even though we were following a direct path. At around 11:15 a.m., we reached the edge of the ridge and saw a faint shimmer in the air, the same distortion we had witnessed the previous night. Emily pointed to a spot near a scrubby juniper tree, and I froze. There, etched into the soil, were symbols that seemed impossibly complex, delicate patterns forming a language I could not read. Yet, as I stared, I realized I could sense the meaning, not in words, but as impressions. Calm, warning, guidance. They were telling us something, that their journey was perilous, that they had escaped a network of entities far older and more organized than humans, and that their survival depended on remaining undetected by forces we could scarcely imagine. At that moment, a movement caught my eye. From the shimmer in the distance, one of the beings stepped forward, the way a ghost might emerge from fog. Unlike the night before, there was no fear this time, only purpose. Emily whispered that she could feel a pulse in the air, almost like a heartbeat, synchronized with the being's steps. I tried to capture the moment on my phone, but again, technology failed. The battery drained instantly, the camera frozen. The being raised a limb, and a series of holographic-like images appeared in the air, projecting a story we could feel rather than see fully. A civilization fleeing a collapsing star system, pursued across galaxies, seeking refuge in the emptiness between worlds. Our minds absorbed fragments of that story like falling into a waterfall of awareness. Ships traversing wormholes, cities floating above molten planets, beings communicating through light and vibration. They were explorers and refugees at the same time, and somehow, our lives were now entwined with theirs. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time was no longer linear. And as the being receded into the shimmer, we noticed something else, subtle changes in the environment. Small rocks levitated briefly, hovering before settling, and the air smelled faintly of a metallic sweetness, like rain on a copper roof. We realized they had left a trail of sorts, not for us, but perhaps for someone or something else to follow. Back in the cabin that night, we tried to process what had happened. I scrawled diagrams in a notebook, symbols we had witnessed etched into the soil, connections to the images projected by the being. Emily documented the emotional impressions, feelings of urgency, curiosity, and the faint undercurrent of sorrow in the entity's message. Over the next week, we experienced more signs of their presence. On October 16th, as we drove toward Socorro, a flickering light appeared on the horizon, small, darting shapes moving with impossible precision. Our car radio crackled to life, broadcasting soft, harmonic tones that shifted in pitch and rhythm as we drove. Emily suggested that the signals were a form of communication, not words, but frequencies conveying meaning directly to our minds. We began to perceive patterns in the night sky, stars forming alignments that seemed intentional, pointing toward coordinates we could not physically reach but could conceptualize, like a cosmic map. The most startling moment came on October 18th, when a local astronomer, Dr. Harold Jensen, invited us to view the sky through the observatory telescope. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Then, in a patch of clear space near the Sagittarius constellation, a silver object appeared, stationary for a fraction of a second before vanishing entirely. Dr. Jensen, a skeptic by nature, admitted he had never seen anything like it. He asked us what we thought, and we realized that words would never suffice. The beings were not here to be understood fully. They were here to be experienced. Over the following months, subtle phenomena continued. We would see fleeting glimpses of shapes in peripheral vision, faint pulses of light in our bedrooms, and sometimes dreams so vivid that waking felt like an intrusion. But the overarching message was clear. They were survivors, escaping a vast interstellar threat, and in some inexplicable way, they had chosen us as witnesses. The realization was both humbling and terrifying. Ordinary life, the mundane routines of work, errands, and small talk, suddenly felt insignificant in comparison to the enormity of what we had encountered. Yet, despite the wonder and the fear, there was a quiet hope. These beings had demonstrated compassion, restraint, and intelligence beyond human comprehension. They were fugitives, yes, but they were also emissaries of a vast and untold cosmos. And somehow, they had trusted two humans to remember, to bear witness, and perhaps to share their story, however fragmentary. The experience left us forever altered. We began documenting everything in detail, recording dates, impressions, and anomalies. We were careful, knowing that few would believe us, yet unable to ignore the undeniable reality of what we had seen. Every flash of light, every anomalous vibration, every symbol etched into the earth was a fragment of a story that stretched across galaxies. And in the quiet moments, we could feel the being's presence lingering just beyond the veil of perception, urging us to look up at the stars and remember that we are not alone, and that some visitors, in their flight from cosmic danger, had chosen to entrust their story to us. By November 2nd, 2018, Emily and I had begun to notice patterns in our lives that seemed directly influenced by the being's presence. Small things at first, unusual alignments of objects in our home, fleeting reflections that didn't belong to anyone, soft vibrations in the air that matched rhythms we could not consciously produce. But the most striking event occurred on the night of November 5th. We had driven back toward Magdalena Ridge, guided by a sense neither of us could explain, as if something were waiting for us. The sky was overcast, and a thick fog hugged the desert floor. Visibility was low, yet as we approached the site where we had first seen the beings, the mist parted in a perfect semicircle, revealing the faint glow of their presence. Emily gasped. There, hovering mere feet above the ground, were three of the beings we had encountered in October. This time, they did not shimmer or distort. They were tangible, almost as if they had solidified just for us. I felt a pulse through my chest, a heartbeat synchronized with theirs, a deep connection that transcended language. One of them raised its arm, and instantly, images and feelings flooded my mind. It was a story of exile and survival. Their homeworld had been a planet orbiting a dying star in a distant galaxy. The civilization was advanced, but the instability of their star had forced them to flee. What we initially perceived as their fragility was not weakness. It was adaptation to travel through hostile environments, a survival strategy refined over millennia. They showed us glimpses of the beings who pursued them, entities of intelligence beyond comprehension, relentless in their search. The fugitives had learned to avoid detection, traveling across star systems, hiding in plain sight, often leaving subtle traces for those who could perceive them. Then came the message, not spoken, not written, but transmitted directly into our consciousness. Observe, remember, prepare. The universe is wider than your understanding, and survival is not only for us, but for all who can perceive beyond the surface. It was a warning, yes, but also an invitation to think, to expand awareness, to recognize the vast complexity of life and intelligence in the cosmos. Emily reached out, placing her hand on my arm, and suddenly, the beings projected what I can only describe as a map, stellar coordinates, patterns of movement, traces of civilizations fleeing unknown dangers. The holographic images pulsed with soft light, and I understood that these were not coordinates to invade, but guides to understanding the breadth of existence. The experience lasted what felt like hours, though it may have been minutes. When it ended, the beings slowly faded into the mist, leaving behind not fear, but a profound sense of responsibility. We had been chosen not to intervene directly, but to witness and carry fragments of their knowledge into the human world. Driving back that night, we struggled to articulate what we had learned. Our notebooks were filled with sketches, impressions, and the strange symbols we could not translate, but we knew they held meaning for someone, somewhere, capable of understanding. Over the following weeks, we noticed subtle confirmations of what we had been shown, unexplainable movements in the sky, patterns of light that aligned with the projections, and an increasing awareness that their flight was ongoing. They had not settled, nor intended to, and yet their presence was detectable to those attuned to the signals of survival and awareness. On November 20th, while reviewing footage from a small telescope we had borrowed from Dr. Jensen, we saw a fleeting anomaly, a tiny, silver object moving against the backdrop of Jupiter, accelerating and decelerating in ways that defied conventional physics. The patterns matched the sequences we had been shown by the beings, an undeniable confirmation that they were still traveling, still fleeing, yet still reaching out in ways we could barely comprehend. Emily and I realized that our role was changing. We were no longer merely witnesses. We had become custodians of a story that spanned galaxies, fugitives and observers intertwined across light years. But even with this awareness, the question remained, what was the ultimate purpose of their flight, and what were they preparing humanity to understand? In the days that followed, subtle phenomena continued to manifest. Dreams so vivid they felt like alternate lives, fleeting glimpses of their forms in reflective surfaces, and faint vibrations in the air that seemed to carry patterns of thought. Each instance reinforced the urgency of their message. They were survivors, yes, but they were also educators in the most delicate sense, guiding without interference, teaching through presence and subtle influence. And then, on December 1st, 2018, a final, unmistakable event occurred. While observing the night sky with a borrowed telescope, a formation of 5 silvery craft appeared in a tight V formation, hovering above the ridge. For the first time, they remained in full view for nearly 10 minutes, pulsating in synchrony, their lights forming patterns that translated directly into perception, warning, guidance, survival, and awareness. Emily whispered that she felt they were saying goodbye, but not in sadness, rather, a transfer of responsibility. We had seen, we had understood fragments, and now it was up to us to integrate these experiences, to watch the skies, to carry forward awareness of what exists beyond the human scale. Driving home that night, a serene calm settled over us. The world felt different, not just because of what we had witnessed, but because of what we now understood about the fragility, resilience, and intelligence that permeates the universe. We had met fugitives of unimaginable origin, beings who had trusted two humans to remember them, and in that trust lay a profound, humbling message. The cosmos is alive, full of flight, pursuit, survival, and awareness. And within that vastness, we, tiny, fleeting, fragile humans, had been chosen to witness, to comprehend, and to carry fragments of their story into our world, forever changed by the encounter. By December 15th, 2018, the events of the past 2 months had transformed Emily and me in ways we could hardly describe. We were no longer the same ordinary couple who had set out on a simple road trip through New Mexico. Each day, fragments of the fugitives' presence lingered around us. Faint pulses in the air, subtle patterns in dust or light, moments when the world seemed to tilt, just enough for us to glimpse the extraordinary underneath the ordinary. The most profound moment came on December 18th, when we returned to the ridge for what we instinctively felt would be the final encounter. The desert was silent, shrouded in the thin frost of early winter. The night sky was luminous, the Milky Way stretching like a bridge across the heavens. As we approached the familiar clearing, the shimmer in the air appeared again, more solid, more real than ever before. 3 of the beings emerged. Their forms were ethereal yet undeniably present, radiating calm intelligence. This time, there was no need for hesitation or fear. Emily and I simply stood, hearts synchronized, waiting. The being in the center projected a series of light patterns, almost like a living constellation. Unlike previous projections, this one carried words, or at least a translation of their meaning directly into our minds. Observe without interfering. Prepare without panic. The universe is not a battlefield, but a living network of awareness. Life persists, even in the face of collapse, because those who perceive beyond fear learn to guide and protect. You have been chosen as witnesses not for your power, but for your clarity of perception. Remember what is fragile, respect what is unseen, and understand that survival depends on awareness. The words resonated in us, not as commands, but as revelation. They were offering insight into a universe where life, intelligent, aware, and fleeting, faced dangers incomprehensible to humans, yet thrived because those capable of perceiving could respond, adapt, and survive. Emily felt tears streaming down her face. "It's hope," she whispered. "They're showing us hope, even in flight, even in danger." The beings then directed our attention to a small hillock near the clearing. On it lay a delicate crystalline object, faintly pulsing with soft blue light. As we approached, we sensed it was not a tool, nor a weapon, but a repository of knowledge, patterns, impressions, data of sorts, designed to be absorbed by attentive minds. When Emily touched it, images filled our awareness. Galaxies teeming with life, civilizations fleeing dying stars, patterns of interstellar migration, and most importantly, strategies for survival and coexistence. Knowledge that was at once terrifying and beautiful. One of the beings then extended a limb, pointing to the horizon. There, we could see faint silhouettes of distant crafts moving across the desert sky, invisible to ordinary eyes. They were leaving, finally, moving toward a safe corridor in the galaxy, yet leaving behind a trail of awareness for those attuned to it. Before disappearing entirely, the beings conveyed a final impression. Carry memory, not fear. The universe is not conquest. It is continuity. Observe, learn, and transmit. Awareness is the greatest gift and the greatest responsibility. Emily and I stood in silence, watching as they vanished into the starlit sky, leaving the desert eerily quiet, yet alive with their presence in ways we could feel but not see. That night, back in our cabin, we documented everything: symbols, impressions, maps, sequences of light, and the emotions transmitted. The experience had changed the way we saw every aspect of life. Ordinary arguments seemed trivial. Daily routines were now imbued with awareness of fragility, impermanence, and the interconnectedness of all conscious life. Over the next several months, subtle phenomena continued: soft pulses in the air, dreams of their journeys, and occasional glimpses of lights moving with impossible precision. But the encounters themselves had ended. What remained was a message to be carried, understood, and respected. We realized that the fugitives' flight was not just their story. It was a warning, a lesson, and a challenge. Humanity, though unaware, exists in a vast network of intelligent life, some fleeing danger, some observing, some hidden. Survival is not a matter of force, but of perception, empathy, and awareness. Emily and I began sharing fragments of the experience cautiously, through private journals, conversations with trusted astronomers, and subtle hints in forums dedicated to anomalies. Most dismissed it, of course, but we had never expected universal recognition. That was not the point. The point was understanding, integration, and vigilance. Over time, the experience shaped our lives profoundly. We traveled less, observed more. We studied celestial patterns, focusing on awareness rather than measurement. We felt the presence of life beyond Earth not as curiosity alone, but as responsibility. By December 2019, we had compiled an extensive record of dates, impressions, and anomalies, all cross-referenced with celestial events. And while skeptics questioned, denied, or mocked, we remained connected to the memory of the beings, not as aliens from a faraway planet, but as messengers of awareness, fugitives who trusted humans to witness, comprehend, and remember. Looking back now, years later, the road trip that began as ordinary changed everything. We were witnesses to something extraordinary, beyond fear, beyond explanation. The fugitives had trusted us with fragments of a cosmic story, a tale of survival, intelligence, and responsibility across galaxies. And their final message remains clear: observe without interference, prepare without panic, and remember that awareness is the greatest gift in a universe far larger and more intricate than we can imagine. Emily and I often sit under the stars, silently, feeling the pulse of that encounter lingering in the air. And sometimes, when the night is perfectly still, we swear we see a faint shimmer in the distance, a reminder that we are not alone, that life persists in ways we can barely perceive, and that the universe, in all its immensity, continues its flight, quietly, endlessly, waiting for those who are awake to understand.